evening all. A little bit later on I'll be trying this biscuit at the end, as I traditionally do. This is called a pickup bar. It's German, made by Balsen, not to be confused with something that sounds similar. Choco and milk. So I haven't tried one of these before, so let's see at the end of the episode what it's like. But anyway, on with the show. And what a strange week it's been. Well, kicking things off, at the start of the week, Lord Tony Hall, the Director General of the BBC, made a speech where he said that the phrase mainstream media is now seen as a term of abuse, an assault on the freedom of expression. You don't say, Tony. So Hall, in his speech, complained about journalists being attacked by online trolls, by people of all political persuasions, sort of attacking them, assaulting them, denigrating their craft, and trying to drag the job of journalists down to the mud so that people will mistrust them. And Lord Hall's reading of this is completely back to front. He sees the problem as you and me and everybody else out there on the internet who are commenting on news stories of the day. No, we're the problem. We're the problem. If we don't like the stories that they put out, we're the problem. He doesn't look at it from the point of view of maybe the mainstream media are the problem. You see, mainstream media is not a term of abuse in its own. It is a descriptive phrase to differentiate traditional media that is based around newspapers, radio, television, that has been established for decades and practiced by very well-funded organizations, media corporations, and alternative media, which is using the internet as its primary conveyor of information, and done by either citizen journalists or citizen commentators, people outside of a kind of production line of journalists, instant journalists, journalism trainees, right? So they are bringing a different perspective. And I'm not saying that the alternative media is always right and the mainstream media is always wrong. You only have to look in alternative media. Also includes BuzzFeed, Slate and Vox, three of the most disingenuous news agencies you can find out there. It's just mainstream media and alternative media is just descriptive terminology to differentiate overall the two different styles. So it's not necessarily a term of abuse. Now, people talk about mainstream media in disparaging terms, and that is not the fault of the citizen journalists and the commentators out there. It is the fault of the mainstream media, the journalists themselves, because they have been using words like narrative to describe news story. Now, I've described in previous videos why that is a problem. You should not use the word narrative when describing news stories, because narrative means you are fitting salient facts to fit a story, and if facts come in that disrupt that story, the facts get discarded. And we've seen that, say, in the last 6 months with Covington, with Smollett, with Kavanagh, with a lot of other things, is that the narrative has taken precedence. And when the narrative gets a knock, the journalist class sort of close ranks and they go into a meltdown. This is not a healthy way to run news, and Lord Hall should realise that. So no, I have no sympathy for Lord Hall. You know, he has to sort his own house out first. Where there is a breakdown of trust between news consumers and news purveyors, the purveyors should be looking to themselves. What have we done wrong? Why is the trust broken down? It's not us in the public. It is you in the mainstream media. Sort your own house out first before you start lecturing to the rest of us, Lord Hall. Speaking of Jussie Smollett, he was at the centre of two news stories that really cast into doubt the integrity of American journalism. And Smollett was released, had all the charges against him dropped by the Chicago prosecutor Kim Foxx. And this raised more questions and worrying issues than it solved. Rather than the case against Smollett having weaknesses, it didn't. The evidence against him before is still there. But it looks like there's been some interference. There's been favors called in. Ms. Fox's actions seem to anger and annoy the Chicago Police Department, amongst other people. And it may involve the Obamas sort of stepping and wading in and intervening in this case, which would be very worrying if that were proven true. But the media, they were quick to defend Smollett, and then the story came out and they had to backtrack a little bit. Now they feel they can go back to their initial default position. Everything here kind of reminds me a bit of the O.J. Simpson case in terms of if you're a celebrity and a person of colour, you don't want it kicking off, and some ineptitude in the legal system can be of great benefit if you're a celebrity of colour in the United States. After all, as I have paraphrased a quote of the time, if the MAGA hat don't fit, you must acquit. But that's not all that was going on, because we now have the Mueller investigation. The summary was released this week, and it destroys the whole Trump-Russia collusion story that journalists like Rachel Maddow have been pushing for the last couple of years. Maddow was seen to be almost breaking down and crying as he had to read that there was no evidence of collusion between Trump and the Russian government. This is what I mean about narratives. You cannot have the narratives without the facts. The journalism has got it all back to front, and that is why people are fed up with it. We're fed up with this style of journalism, which is extremely partisan. And let me give you another example in the UK. It's that a couple of days ago, the Channel 4 newsreader, Jon Snow, who is part of the execrable Snow family, in my opinion, but a man who is very much a Marxist, who was sent by Channel 4 to cover the Brexit protests. The people in favour of leaving the EU went on a protest in London, and he said he'd never seen so many white people all together in the same place at the same time. And he's drawn a lot of negative comments, a lot of people criticising him for saying that, and rightly so. It's a disgraceful thing for a journalist to say. It puts such a horrid slight on people. This is an issue of Brexit is an issue of the heart. It's an issue of conviction, of morality, of people's reasons to stay or leave the EU. It has nothing to do with people's racial identity. And Snow is playing that card, and shame on him for doing so. Snow hasn't apologised, but Channel 4 have acknowledged that his comments have caused upset. Well, whoopee-doo. Again, Lord Hall, have a look around you. This is the media landscape you're worried about. You know, we in the public don't care about you anymore. Tell us the truth. Have your journalists put out stories that are based around facts and not the journalists' opinions, because the journalists' opinions are all slanted. They're heavily slanted one way. I mean, particularly in the UK, not so much in the US, where there's it's more partisan, but you actually have news networks wearing their political colours on their sleeves, unlike in Britain, where it's a bit more mealy-mouthed. This is a pretense of impartiality when actually people are firmly in a political camp. So yeah, Lord Hall, just sort your own house out before you start lecturing us about what is and what isn't a term of abuse. And I suppose we have to get to Brexit now, because we're stuck in this impasse and deadlock. Nothing that gets proposed in Parliament can get through Parliament itself. It can't succeed in a parliamentary vote. We had Remainers sign this petition. They got a few million signatures. Some of them might even be real. They also had a march in London. They claimed that 1 million people were there. The real figure is somewhere between 300 and 400,000. But you couldn't say that to them without making them angry, and boy, do they get angry. Likewise, there was a counter-protest for Leave voters. Didn't quite have the same numbers, slightly fewer than Remain, but it's been pointed out that leaving the EU is the default position. It's been decided in a referendum, and also people have got jobs, they've got work, they had further to travel because they're not London based. Anyway, it's all nice that you get out there and you make your voice known, but it doesn't really count, because the referendum is what counts. The general election is what counts. Your local elections are what counts. Petitions, and protests just raise awareness. That's what it does. So I'm not really that fussed either way on this issue. But the behaviour of Remainers continues to fascinate me, because now I'm starting to think of them kind of like heroin addicts, that they're addicted to the EU. Much like a heroin addict, even if they're a close relative or a loved one, and you want to help them through and you want them to break the addiction, but they will steal, they'll hit you, they'll use violence against you, they'll steal from you in order to get the hit. That nothing matters but the hit, that they've got to have the drugs. And I see this as a metaphor for die-hard Remainers in the EU. They desperately need it, to the point that they will wreck everything. When I look at the stuff that's going on in Parliament, it's Remainers that are holding everything up. Because it's been decided on in a referendum. So now what we should have is a debate between a no-deal, clean break, the hard Brexit, and the withdrawal agreement, or some variant along that line. That should be the binary choice, soft or hard. This is what we knew from day one, soft or hard. And that should be the default position. But the Remainers are ruining everything until you get to the stage where Brexit has to be called off, which is what their ultimate game is. And they're destroying democracy, they're destroying trust with the public, they're destroying the parliamentary system. They're prepared to see it burn. Everything just destroyed in order to remain in the EU. And this is a mania now. It's not an issue that we can even discuss in a friendly way. There's been surveys conducted where Leavers have a better view and a more forgiving view of Remainers than the other way round. When asked, would you be happy for your son and daughter to date someone who voted the other way? So if you are a Leaver, would you be happy for your son or daughter to date a Remainer? And most Leave voters say yes, they'd be happy. Considerably fewer Remain voters would like to see their children dating a Leave voter. A lot lower number of people are even happy to have a Leave voter live next door to them. So this is a mania that has taken over, where hatred is the driving motivational force. It's not just let's have a disagreement and debate the issue. No, Remainers seem driven by hate, and it's very scary, and I'm worried about what this is going to do, because what Remainers MPs should be doing is stepping aside. They should concede that they lost a referendum result, even if they believe that was advisory. As I've said in a previous video, there's a bug going around here. As I said in a previous video, what the referendum has shown is that there is a deep malaise amongst the British voters for the EU, and they've got to address that malaise. Why are people against the European Union? What has driven them away? And they're not dealing with that. And we also had the EU Copyright Act come out this week, particularly Articles 11 and 13, which are the most controversial ones that will have a negative impact on independent creators on the internet, which has been an absolute boom in the last 10 years. It's been absolutely fantastic. And it's the EU Copyright Act will destroy that. Now, Remainers always say, but we'll always have the veto. Don't talk nonsense. We'll always have the veto. Well, who has vetoed the European Copyright Act? Who has vetoed Article 13? You can't trust the veto. And, as I have proven to Remain voters, the veto is going. The EU want to get rid of the veto. Oh, but we could always veto that decision to get rid of the veto. No, you can't. Because the EU don't want it this way. So we're watching everything, centuries of a wonderful parliamentary and democratic tradition just being burnt by people who cannot give up their fix of the EU. So where does this all leave us? Well, the Conservative Party, as we've seen in recent times, is having an identity crisis, and it's got to work out whether it is a Conservative Party, what its relationship to its supporters is. Frankly, it needs kind of dismantling and reassembling in some changed form. I don't have the answers to that. Labour, in the meantime, are opposing everything because they want a general election. That's all they want. The nationalist parties want a general election because they can try and force their independence agendas into the parliamentary discussion again. The Remainers, the independent group, now led by Heidi Allen. You crazy guys. They just want they got to have me, their EU. I got to have it. So it's all a huge mess, and we don't know. And as we speak, as I'm recording this, Dominic Grieve has faced a vote of no confidence by his local parliamentary constituents, and George Osborne and Matthew Dancona don't like it. Don't like the proles having their say against a man of such integrity and intelligence as Dominic Grieve. Well, he may be intelligent anyway. So, on all this, it's time to take the biscuit, and then we're going to try this German pickup. Right, choco and milk. Again, let's give it a go. And until next time, try not to despair too much.